Hey, this is Sydney, and I will be talking about addictions and what they are and what causes them. Then I will discuss how addictions affect the brain, how the brain develops tolerance, and what happens when compulsion takes over. Lastly, I will talk about the different types of addictions and how they are treated. I will start with what addiction is. Addiction is a condition that results when a person ingests a substance or takes part in an activity that is pleasurable, but when continued, it becomes compulsive and interferes with the person's life. Repeated drug use or performing a certain behavior can lead to changes in the brain and challenge the addicted person's self-control and interfere with their ability to resist the urge to do more. There are two forms of physical addiction. The first is the biological state where the body adapts to the presence of a drug, so that specific drug no longer has the same effect. This is known as tolerance, which I will go into more depth later in the presentation. The second form is the phenomenon of overreaction by the brain to the substance or behavior. They are often associated by certain cues. For example, when an alcoholic is walking down the same street their favorite bar is on, they are more likely to stop into that bar and buy a drink. This is because the alcoholic has developed a personal cue with this street, so they can't resist their urge to go and have a drink. So we know the two forms of physical addiction, but what causes addiction? Most addictive behavior is caused by stress. People often switch addictive actions because many of these psychologically based addictions are not based on brain or drug effects. The person may switch from one drug to another or to a non-drug behavior. In some cases, people enjoy the high of a certain substance or behavior so much they try to achieve the high over and over again. This causes addiction to set into the brain. Most drugs will affect the brain's reward circuit by overproducing the chemical messenger dopamine. This part of the brain controls the body's ability to feel pleasure. Overstimulation of the reward circuit causes the high and makes the person want to take the drug or perform the action over and over again. After a while, the brain will develop tolerance to the behavior or substance. Tolerance is when the person doesn't respond to a substance or behavior the same way as they initially did. In other words, the brain adapts in a way and makes the substance or action less pleasurable. Natural rewards come with time and effort, whereas addictive drugs and behaviors flood the brain with dopamine, which essentially provides a shortcut. Addictive drugs, for instance, release 2 to 10 times the amount of dopamine that natural rewards do. This causes the brain to become overwhelmed, so the brain responds by producing less dopamine or eliminating dopamine receptors. As a result, the person believes they have to take more of the drug in order to achieve the same dopamine high because their brain developed tolerance. After tolerance, compulsion sets in, and the person's desire to recreate the pleasurable effect from the substance or behavior persists. The brain develops environmental cues that associate with addiction. Environmental cues could be anything from a hypodermic needle for a heroin addict or a whiskey bottle for an alcoholic. When an addict comes across these environmental cues, intense cravings set in, and the ability to resist the urge becomes near to impossible. There are 3 main categories of addictions. The first is substance addictions. The most common substance addictions are alcohol, tobacco, prescription drugs, and marijuana. Opioids, cocaine, amphetamines, hallucinogens, and inhalants may not come to mind, but they are all just as addictive. Along with substances, certain behaviors can also be addictive. Eating, shopping, sex and pornography, using the internet, video games, working, exercising, spiritual obsession, seeking out pain, cutting, and shopping are all popular behaviors that can lead to addiction. Another group of addictions are impulsive control disorders. This is a list of disorders where impulses cannot be resisted, which is considered a type of addiction. These include compulsive aggression, kleptomania, which is compulsive stealing, pyromania, which is the compulsive setting of fires, and gambling. One of the first steps in fighting addiction is realizing you have a problem and identifying what the problem is. Then the individual must focus on getting sober and preventing future relapses. The level of addiction, type of substance, and behavior of the individual determines outpatient care or residential settings. After that is determined, fighting the addiction may consist of just the individual going through the program, or the individual could be placed in a group setting. Either way, support from family members is important and can play a key role in fighting and beating the addiction. There are different ways an addict could receive treatment. One way is psychotherapy. Psychotherapy is the treatment of a mental disorder by psychological rather than medical means. Sessions could be a one-on-one with just the specialist and the individual, or family members may be present. The specialist helps with the coping of cravings, avoiding the substance, and dealing with relapses when they occur. Another way to treat addiction is to find local self-help groups. In self-help groups, people provide support for each other because they are all there for a common goal, to defeat addiction. These groups can help with the addict find other people who are going through the same process. Finding people with the same problem can help boost motivation for the individual. Self-help groups are also a good source of education and information about the addiction. Examples of popular self-help groups include Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. I hope you learned something new about addiction from my presentation. If you have any further questions, you can refer to my sources at the end of the presentation or just ask.